There is a version of you sitting somewhere right now, maybe on a couch, maybe in a car, maybe lying in bed staring at the ceiling in the quiet dark of 2 in the morning when the rest of the house is asleep and the thoughts won't stop coming. And that version of you has a dream, a real one. Not a passing thought, not a casual wish like, I hope it doesn't rain today. Not the kind of thing you'd forget by lunchtime. A real burning, gut-deep dream about the life you want to live, the person you want to become, the thing you want to build, the mark you want to leave on the world before you leave the world entirely. And you've had that dream for a while now, maybe years, maybe longer than you'd care to admit out loud. Maybe so long that you've started to feel a low-grade shame about the distance between where you are and where you always said you were going to be. And here's the brutal, uncomfortable, nobody wants to say it out loud truth about that dream. Having it means almost nothing. I know that's not what you expected to hear. I know that runs counter to every motivational poster you've ever seen hanging in a school hallway or a gym locker room. It runs counter to every commencement speech you've ever sat through. Every self-help book that told you the first step to achieving your dreams is simply to believe in them hard enough. Every social media quote that promised you the universe would conspire in your favor if your intentions were pure enough. But stay with me here, because what I'm about to walk you through is not designed to crush your hope. It's designed to save it. It's designed to pull you out of the comfortable fog that most people spend their entire lives living inside of, and show you exactly, with total clarity, with no padding, with no comfortable fictions, what separates the people who actually build the life they envisioned from the people who die with that vision still locked inside them, never touched, never realized, never even truly, honestly, fully attempted. That separation is real. It is not small. It is not subtle. And it is not about luck. It is not about talent. It is not about who your parents were, or what city you grew up in, or whether you had the right connections or caught the right break at the right time. Those things matter on the margins. They create advantages and disadvantages that are real and that deserve to be acknowledged. But they are not the core of the difference between the people who win and the people who only ever dream. The core of it is something much simpler, much harder, and much more available to every single human being on this planet. Regardless of background, regardless of starting point, regardless of circumstance. And when you truly understand it, not intellectually, not as a concept you nod along to, not as something you file away under good point and forget by Thursday, but when you feel it down in your bones, when it changes the way you get out of bed in the morning, when it changes the way you look at every hour of the day that you've been letting pass without doing something with it, something shifts. Something in you reorganizes, and you never look at your own life, your own potential, your own daily choices quite the same way again. So let's talk about it. Let's really talk about it. Let's talk about what it actually means to be a winner. Let's talk about what it actually means to be a dreamer. And let's talk about the exact line that divides them, because that line is not where most people think it is, and the moment you see where it actually is, you will never be able to unsee it. The dreamer's comfortable prison. The first thing you need to understand about dreamers, and I mean this with total sincerity, without contempt, because at various points in their lives, most winners were also dreamers, and the transition was not clean or easy for any of them, is that dreamers are not lazy people. That is one of the great misconceptions. When people hear the word dreamer used in a critical context, they tend to picture somebody who sleeps until noon, scrolls through social media for 5 hours a day, avoids any form of sustained effort, and has nothing but vague ambitions and excuses for why they haven't pursued them. That is not who I'm talking about. That person exists, but that person is not the dreamer who most needs to hear this. The dreamers I'm talking about are often incredibly hardworking, deeply thoughtful, genuinely ambitious people. They are people who care deeply about their potential, who care about what they're capable of, who care about the life they want to build. They're people who read the books. They buy the books, they read the books, Sometimes they take notes in the margins. They listen to the podcasts. They watch the videos. They journal about their goals. Some of them have elaborate systems, color-coded planners, 5-year timelines, vision boards on the wall above their desk. They can articulate with extraordinary detail and passion exactly what they want their life to look like 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. They can describe the business and what problem it solves and who the customer is. They can tell you about the physique they want and the training philosophy they've been researching. They can paint a picture of the relationship they want, the financial freedom they want, the impact they want to make, the legacy they want to leave. They have thought about it extensively. Some of them have thought about almost nothing else. They want it deeply and they want it genuinely, and yet they don't have it. And the years are passing and they still don't have it. And they won't have it. Not because they're not smart enough, not because they're not talented enough, not because the universe is conspiring against them, but because they have built, without realizing it, without meaning to, without ever consciously choosing it, the most comfortable prison ever constructed. A prison made entirely of intention. Intention is the currency of dreamers. It is what they trade in, what they accumulate, what they protect. Winners deal in a different currency altogether, and we'll get to that. But intention, the plan to do something, the desire to do something, the belief that you will do something, the feeling that the doing is right around the corner, is what keeps dreamers warm at night. It is what allows them to feel good, or at least okay, about the gap between where they are and where they want to be. Because as long as they intend to close that gap, they can live in that gap without feeling like they're failing. The intention itself becomes the substitute for the action. The planning becomes a replacement for the doing. The research becomes a way of feeling productive without actually producing anything. And that substitution is so smooth, so seamless, so psychologically comfortable that most people never notice it's happening. They genuinely believe they are on the way. They tell themselves every day that they are moving toward it. And technically, mentally, in the landscape of their inner life, they are. But in the landscape of their actual life, in the real world where time moves in one direction and doesn't wait, nothing is changing. Think about how many times you have told yourself or told someone else, "I'm going to start that business." Not, "I started it." Not, "I launched it." Not, "Here is the thing I built. Here is the evidence that it exists in the world." But, "I'm going to." Think about how many times you've said, "I've been meaning to get back to the gym. I've been meaning to clean up my diet. I've been meaning to have that hard conversation with my partner. I've been meaning to write that first chapter. I've been meaning to reach out to that person I've been neglecting. I've been meaning to finally go back to school." Meaning to, going to, planning to, intending to. These are the phrases of a dreamer. They are honest phrases. The person saying them is not lying. They genuinely mean to do the thing, but they are living proof of the gap between the intention and the act.
In the language of dreamers, the future tense is everything, and it is killing them, softly, slowly, one deferred day at a time.
Here's what makes this particularly insidious. The brain does not fully distinguish between vividly imagining an action and actually performing it. There is real, well-documented neuroscience behind this. Research on mental rehearsal and motor function, including studies involving athletes, musicians, and surgeons, has consistently shown that when you imagine doing something with sufficient detail and vividness, your brain activates many of the same neural pathways it would activate if you were actually doing the thing. This is genuinely useful in certain contexts. Elite athletes use mental rehearsal as part of their preparation. Surgeons mentally walk through complex procedures before performing them. Musicians mentally rehearse passages they're preparing. When used alongside physical practice, mental rehearsal can meaningfully accelerate skill development. But here's where it goes badly wrong for dreamers. The dopamine your brain delivers when you think about achieving something does not wait for the achievement. It fires early. It fires in anticipation. When you think about starting the business, your brain gives you a little preview of the reward that starting the business might eventually produce, a small biochemical signal that feels like progress. And that preview feels good. It genuinely feels good. It feels like momentum. And if you are not careful, if you are not relentlessly honest with yourself about what you have and have not actually done, you learn to live off those previews. You learn to feel the feeling of winning without doing the work of winning. And then you wonder why nothing is changing, why the years keep passing, why the dream keeps receding instead of getting closer. The dreamer doesn't just want the life. The dreamer wants to feel like they're on their way to the life. And thinking, planning, researching, intending, all of that creates the feeling of being on the way. And so they stay on the way, perpetually, indefinitely, always in motion in the landscape of their imagination, always standing still in the landscape of their actual existence. What a winner actually is. Now let's talk about winners. And I want to be precise here because this word gets badly distorted. We live in a culture that has turned winning into a narrow, highly specific kind of outcome. Fame, wealth, a certain kind of publicly visible success, a follower count, a net worth figure, an appearance on a list somewhere. If you don't have those things, the culture implies you haven't won. And if you do have those things, regardless of how you got them or what you've become in the process of getting them, you're a winner. That framing is not just shallow, it is actively misleading. And it causes enormous damage because it makes people believe they need to become something recognizable and publicly celebrated in order to have won anything. And it causes them to dismiss the genuine victories happening in quieter lives all around them. A winner, in the way I'm using the term, is a person who identified something they wanted: a life, a capability, a relationship, a contribution, a level of freedom, a standard of integrity, decided they were going to pursue it with everything they had, and then built their entire way of operating around the relentless, consistent, daily execution of that pursuit. With total honesty about where they are and where they aren't, with complete accountability for their results and the absence of results, with genuine willingness to endure whatever comes between them and the target, and with the patience to stay in the process long enough for the process to produce what the process produces, not on their preferred timeline, not when it becomes convenient, but when it is ready. Winners are not always the richest people. They are not always the most famous. They are not always the ones with the biggest platform or the most decorated career. Some of the most genuine, unambiguous winners I have ever encountered or studied are people whose names you would never recognize. The single mother who worked 2 jobs for 7 years to put herself through nursing school while raising 3 kids without child support from a partner who left. She's a winner. The man who walked out of prison at 42 with nothing to his name and built a construction company that employs 20 people and provides for 20 families. He's a winner. The kid who grew up in a house where nobody had ever gone to college, where there was not always enough food, where people in his life told him he was being unrealistic and setting himself up for disappointment, and who became a physician anyway. He's a winner. The outcome can look wildly different from one person to the next. The internal operating system is always recognizably the same. And here is what that operating system runs on at its most fundamental level. It runs on the complete rejection of the gap between deciding and doing. Winners do not live in that gap. They pass through it. Sometimes the gap is enormous and terrifying, and it would be entirely understandable and forgivable to stay on the near side of it indefinitely. But winners don't take up residence on the near side. They don't set up furniture in it. They don't check in weekly to see how the gap is doing. They hate the gap. The gap irritates them on a cellular level. The distance between what they want and what they currently have is not something they find comfortable to sit inside of. It is something they experience as a constant pressure that pushes them forward. When a winner decides they want something, there is an almost physical compulsion to immediately begin moving toward it. Not tomorrow, not after the weekend, not when the stars align. Now, with whatever is available right now, in whatever form that takes. Messy, imperfect, incomplete, underfunded, underprepared, now. Because beginning is the thing. Beginning is what separates the decision from becoming yet another intention. Michael Jordan did not become who he became because he was the most naturally gifted basketball player ever born. By his own account, in interviews across decades, stated with remarkable consistency, he was cut from his high school varsity team as a sophomore at Laney High School in Wilmington, North Carolina. He was not good enough. He was told, explicitly, by the institution of competitive basketball, that he was not good enough to play at the varsity level. Most people who receive that verdict learn to live with it. They absorb it as information about a limit. They file it away as evidence of what they are and aren't. They become the person who played ball in middle school, who almost made the team, who could have been pretty good if things had gone differently. Jordan went home that day and he cried. And then he began training with an intensity, a focus, and an obsession that would have unnerved most adults in his life, let alone his teenage peers. He was in the gym before school. He was in the gym after school. He put in work that nobody asked him to put in, that nobody was monitoring, that nobody was grading, not because there was a program, not because someone compelled him, but because the gap between what he was told he was and what he had decided he was going to become was completely intolerable to him. And the only thing that made it bearable was moving toward it, shrinking it, attacking it from every angle with everything he had. That is the internal experience of a winner. Not the absence of failure. He was failed. Not the absence of doubt, he felt it. Not the absence of setbacks. His entire career is lined with them. The absolute refusal to let any of those things become the final word. The comfort addiction. One of the most dangerous forces working against human potential is not adversity. That is the counterintuitive part. Adversity, when it strikes, tends to activate people. It forces decisions, forces movement, forces a confrontation with reality that can be clarifying even when it's devastating. The person who loses everything in a financial collapse and has to rebuild from nothing is sometimes, paradoxically, more alive and more purposeful in the rebuilding than they ever were in the comfortable accumulation. Because loss strips away the option of coasting. It forces a reckoning. It makes inaction impossible in a way that comfort never does. Comfort keeps you still. It keeps you warm. It keeps you fed and entertained and occupied and distracted. And it does all of this while your potential sits unaddressed, while your dreams collect dust, while the years move in their unstoppable forward direction and you remain exactly where you were last year and the year before that. Comfort is sedative. And what makes it so insidious is that it doesn't feel like failure. It doesn't feel like giving up. It feels like life being fine. It feels like there's nothing urgently wrong. And when there's nothing urgently wrong, there is no urgency to change. And without urgency to change, nothing changes. Here is something most people have never truly reckoned with. Comfort is not neutral. It is not simply the absence of discomfort, a resting state between episodes of effort. Comfort is actively working against you in every moment that you choose it over growth. Every hour you spend in the comfort of the familiar, the safe, the known, is an hour your skills are stagnating, your network is not expanding, your body is not being challenged, your mind is not being stretched, your ideas are not being tested, your dreams are not being built. Comfort is not rest, though we confuse them constantly. Rest is a strategic decision made in deliberate service of performance. Comfort is the abandonment of the performance altogether. The dreamer is, above all things, addicted to comfort. Not consciously, not deliberately. Not because they have made a calculation and decided they prefer comfort to achievement. If you asked them, they would deny it passionately, and they would believe their denial. But their behavior tells a different story. Their behavior, accumulated across hundreds of days and thousands of small decisions, reveals a consistent preference for the feeling of thinking about growth over the discomfort of actually growing, for the warmth of the intention over the friction of the execution, for the safety of the plan over the exposure of the attempt. The winner has internalized something the dreamer keeps skipping past. The price is not optional. The suffering, the real, genuine, undeniable difficulty of building something hard, of developing a skill from scratch, of pushing through resistance, of enduring failure and uncertainty, and the fear that you might be wrong about yourself. That suffering is not a detour on the way to the good stuff. It is not a sign that you're doing it wrong. It is not an obstacle created by bad luck or poor timing. It is the price of admission. It has always been the price. It will always be the price. And no amount of desire, no depth of intention, no sophistication of planning will serve as payment. Only the doing pays the price. Think about what happens to lottery winners. The data is bleak. Studies, including research cited by the National Endowment for Financial Education, suggest that a significant percentage of people who receive sudden, large windfalls end up bankrupt within a few years. Some estimates suggest as many as 70%. Now think about why. Were they all foolish? Were they all irresponsible and naive? Some were, but not all of them. The answer is more fundamental and more sobering. They received a result that their internal development had not prepared them to manage. They got the prize without going through the process that the prize demands. They skipped the building phase, the years of earning, managing, failing, recovering, learning, adjusting, and received the destination without having traveled the road. And because they had not traveled the road, they did not have the navigation skills the road would have built. And so the destination slipped through their fingers. The process is not punishment. It is preparation. It is the mechanism by which pursuing something builds inside you the person capable of receiving and sustaining it. Skip the process and you skip the preparation. And without the preparation, the prize does not complete you. It often destroys you.
The daily religion of execution.
If you want to understand the real operational difference between a winner and a dreamer, not the inspirational version, not the summary on a quote card version, but the structural, concrete, daily difference, stop looking at the big moments. Stop looking at the championships, the launches, the public announcements, the milestone achievements. Those moments are the results. They are the visible consequence of something invisible that was built long before any audience was present. The difference is forged somewhere profoundly less dramatic. It is forged in the daily, grinding, unglamorous, often unwitnessed choices that each person makes about how they spend the smallest units of their time. Winners have built what I can only call a daily religion. Sometimes they call it their discipline. Sometimes their routine. Sometimes their process. Sometimes they don't call it anything. They just do it, the way a person breathes, without needing to name it or explain it or justify it to anyone, including themselves. But what it amounts to, in every case, is this. They have constructed a system of daily behaviors, habits, commitments, and environments that keeps them moving toward what they want, regardless of how they feel on any given morning, regardless of whether they slept well, regardless of whether they're motivated or depleted, or somewhere in between, regardless of whether anyone is watching or cheering or holding them accountable externally. The system runs even when the motivation hasn't shown up. The commitment operates even when the inspiration has taken the day off. And that reliability, that consistent, cumulative, daily output, is the most underrated competitive advantage in the history of human achievement. Think about what discipline actually looks like at the operational level, because it is so often mischaracterized. Discipline does not mean you are a machine. It does not mean you never feel the pull of the comfortable option, never feel the appeal of sleeping an extra hour, never feel the seductive gravity of postponing the hard thing in favor of something easier and more immediately rewarding. It means that in the moment when those competing forces meet, when comfort and commitment face off inside you, commitment wins. Not sometimes, not when the stakes feel particularly high, not when someone is watching, reliably, predictably, day after day, in the ordinary moments that don't feel important while they're happening but are, in the aggregate, everything. Kobe Bryant used to wake up at 4 in the morning to train. This is documented not just by Kobe himself, but by multiple trainers, teammates, and colleagues who experienced it firsthand. People like his longtime trainer Tim Grover, who has spoken about it in interviews and in his book, Relentless, published in 2013. Kobe did not do this occasionally, in a burst of competitive inspiration before a big game. He did it routinely, systematically, when there was no big game, when no one was expecting it, when the only thing in the gym was him and the work. By the time his teammates and opponents were waking up at a reasonable hour, Kobe had already put in multiple hours of shooting, conditioning, and skill work. And then he would practice with the team, and then he would stay after practice to put in more. Day after day, year after year, that gap in daily output accumulates into a gap in capability that looks, from the outside, like supernatural talent. It is not. It is the mathematical, inevitable result of choosing, over and over and over again, to do the thing when doing the thing is optional, to press when no one is requiring you to press, to move when standing still would be perfectly acceptable to everyone around you. Warren Buffett, one of the most successful investors in the history of finance, reads between 500 and 1,000 pages every single day. That number has been quoted by him directly and confirmed by people who have spent time around him throughout his career. He has said explicitly that this habit, this daily, undramatic, private habit, is the most important investment he has ever made. Not a particular stock purchase, not a strategic acquisition, not a particular relationship he cultivated or opportunity he seized. Reading. Daily, disciplined, decades-long reading that has built a knowledge base so deep, so wide, and so carefully organized that his ability to evaluate opportunities in his field is simply of a different category than almost anyone else who has ever operated in it. The results of that habit did not appear in a week or a year. They appeared over decades, compounding quietly, invisibly, until the compounding had produced something that looked from the outside like genius. It was not genius. It was the daily religion of a man who understood that the work you do in private determines the results you achieve in public, and who made peace with that understanding many decades ago and simply began. This is what the daily religion of execution looks like, and the dreamer does not practice it. The dreamer believes, often sincerely, often desperately, that when the right moment arrives, when inspiration strikes, when things align, they will pour themselves into the work with such fervor and intensity that the concentrated effort will compensate for all the inconsistency that preceded it. It will not. Not because the effort isn't genuine, but because the winner is not merely working harder on the days when both of them show up. The winner is showing up on the hundreds and thousands of days the dreamer doesn't. And those days, those quiet, unremarkable, uncelebrated days when nothing dramatic happens and no one is keeping score, those days are the whole game. The lie of waiting for the right moment. Let me tell you something about the right moment that will rearrange how you think about your own life. Something that took a lot of people a lot of painful years to learn. and that I want to hand to you right now so you can skip the years. The right moment is not coming. It does not exist as a future event that will eventually arrive if you wait patiently enough. The right moment is a fiction, a beautifully constructed, psychologically useful fiction invented by people who are afraid to begin, and maintained because the fiction is far more comfortable than the alternative, which is beginning without any guarantees. You are waiting for the right moment to start the business. What does that moment require? A little more capital, a little more clarity on the business model, a little more certainty about the market, a little more time to research the competition, a little more confidence that the timing is right. Okay, so you save some money, and then an unexpected expense comes up. You refine the business model, and then a new competitor appears that makes you want to reconsider the positioning. You wait for the market to stabilize, and then a new development makes stabilization feel uncertain. And then life happens. A family situation, a health issue, a job change, a relationship that demands more of you. And then, and then, and then. The list of prerequisites for the right moment is infinitely long and perpetually regenerative. The moment you satisfy one condition, two more appear, because the list is not an honest inventory of genuine necessary conditions. It is a defense mechanism. It is your fear of failing, your fear of judgment, your fear of exposure, speaking in the language of rational planning. And it is so convincing, so reasonable sounding, so genuinely indistinguishable from actual prudence, that you can spend a lifetime honoring it without ever recognizing what it actually is. You are waiting for the right moment to get serious about your health. January feels right, a clean start. But December is full of holidays, and it would be unrealistic to start during the holidays. So, January. But then January arrives and work is chaotic. February then. But February comes and there's a family event. March, April. The cycle repeats and another year passes, and your body has been living inside every single day of that cycle, paying a price for every deferred moment. You are waiting for the right moment to have the honest, necessary, long overdue conversation with your partner about what's not working, with your boss about what you need, with your parent before it's too late, with the friend you've been distancing yourself from without explaining why. And the longer you wait, the larger the conversation grows in your mind, the more charged the dynamic becomes, and the more the distance expands between you and the resolution that both of you deserve. And eventually, the moment passes, not because you found the right one, but because too much time has gone by for the resolution to be what it might have been. Winners do not wait for the right moment. This is not because they are reckless or impulsive or indifferent to risk. Many of the most successful people who have ever built anything significant were extraordinarily thoughtful, careful, research-driven people. The difference is not that they skip the thinking. It's that the thinking doesn't become infinite. It does not become an endless regress of preparation that never arrives at action. They understand something the dreamer hasn't fully accepted. The right moment is not found. It is made. It is created by the act of beginning. The first step changes the conditions. It creates traction, reveals information, generates feedback, forces decisions, builds capability, and opens doors that are simply not visible from the starting point. You cannot see what is on the other side of the beginning until you begin. No amount of preparation will show you what beginning shows you. No amount of planning will generate what action generates. Jeff Bezos left a well-paying, prestigious job on Wall Street in 1994 to start Amazon in his garage in Bellevue, Washington. The internet was barely a public phenomenon. E-commerce had no proven model. The infrastructure for shipping individual products to individual consumers across the country was expensive and logistically formidable. His plan involved driving packages to the post office himself. Every sophisticated, rational observer of that moment could have constructed a compelling argument for why the moment was not right. Bezos looked at the same evidence and made a different calculation: the cost of not trying. The regret of watching someone else build what he could see needed to be built was greater than the cost of trying and failing. He called this his regret minimization framework. He imagined himself at 80, looking back at his life, and asked what he would regret more: taking the leap and failing, or not taking the leap at all. The answer was clear. He started, and starting forced him to solve problems. And solving problems taught him things no amount of prior planning could have. And the things he learned built a company. And the company changed the world. He was not the only person with that vision. He was among the very few who did not wait for the vision to arrive with a warranty. Sarah Blakely had zero experience in fashion, zero experience in manufacturing, zero experience in retail, and $5,000 in savings when she decided to create and sell Spanx. She cold-called mills in North Carolina. She was hung up on. She was ignored. She was told no in more ways than there are words to describe rejection. She didn't know what she was doing. She knew that. She started anyway. She learned by doing, in real time, with the stakes fully live. And she built a company that eventually made her a billionaire. Not because the moment was right, because she refused to wait for the moment and went out and made one herself. This is not an inspirational tale about people who were special. This is an illustration of a principle. Beginning is the mechanism. Beginning is the thing. Beginning is what the dreamer withholds and what the winner delivers. And that distinction, aggregated over a lifetime, is the entire difference between the two. Accountability and the mirror test. There is a moment that every genuine winner has passed through, a specific, internal, often painful moment of radical honesty. That the dreamer is still circling, still approaching, still finding reasons to delay. And the delaying of it is perhaps the single most consequential thing standing between the dreamer and the life they want to live. Because without it, nothing else truly changes. You can develop better habits around it. You can refine your strategy around it. You can optimize your morning routine and curate your environment and upgrade your reading list. But until you pass through this particular moment of reckoning, all of that is decoration on a house built on sand. The moment is this: looking at your life, your actual life, the physical reality of where you are, not the narrative you've been constructing about where you're heading, and saying with complete and unsparing honesty, this is my fault. The gap between where I am and where I said I was going to be. The habits I have not built. The conversations I have not had. The actions I have not taken. The opportunities I have let pass. The potential I have left on the table. This is my fault. Not as a condemnation. Not as a spiral into self-hatred that leaves you paralyzed and convinced you are beyond repair. Not as a verdict about your worth as a human being, but as a clean, clear-eyed, deeply empowering acknowledgement that you are the primary author of your circumstances. Not the only factor. External forces exist, and they are real, but the primary one. The most significant one. The one that, more than any other single variable, determines what happens next. This is one of the hardest things a human being can do because our psychology is engineered to resist it. The brain is extraordinarily, brilliantly good at protecting our self-image. It scans automatically for external explanations for bad outcomes and internal explanations for good ones. It is a machine for shifting blame outward and absorbing credit inward, and it does this so seamlessly that most people never catch it happening. The economy is bad. The market is saturated. My boss doesn't recognize my potential. My upbringing limited my opportunities. The system is stacked against people like me. Timing was wrong. I didn't get the breaks. And sometimes, not rarely, but genuinely sometimes, these things are true. The system is not fair. Opportunities are not equally distributed. Some people do start with enormous advantages that others are denied. These realities are real, and they deserve to be acknowledged.
But here is what the winner has figured out that the dreamer keeps missing. Acknowledging that external forces have contributed to your situation and taking complete personal responsibility for what happens next are not mutually exclusive. They can and must coexist. You can hold both truths at the same time. The deck was stacked, and I am going to play this hand with everything I have anyway. You can acknowledge the obstacle is real and still decide you are going to find a way around it, over it, through it, or that you are going to redefine the game entirely so the obstacle no longer has the authority over you that it once did. What you cannot do, not if you want the life you say you want, is use the deck stacking as an excuse to fold. Because folding protects your ego in the short term and costs you everything in the long term. The moment you say, "This is on me," not in victimhood but in power, something fundamental changes. Because if the current situation is a consequence of your choices and your actions and your defaults and your avoidances, then it can be changed by different choices and different actions and different defaults. It is responsive to you. It is not a fixed verdict handed down by external forces over which you have no influence. It is a current condition produced by a pattern of behavior, and patterns of behavior can change. But only if you own them first. Only if you stop distributing the ownership of your outcomes to every external force in your life and bring it back to yourself, fully, without conditions. Stanford psychologist Carol Dweck spent decades studying this phenomenon through the framework she called mindset theory. Her research, summarized in her 2006 book, Mindset: The New Psychology of Success, found consistent, powerful differences between people who operated from a fixed mindset. The belief that your qualities are essentially carved in stone, that you're either smart or you're not, capable or you're not, talented or you're not, and people who operated from a growth mindset. The belief that qualities are developed through effort, persistence, strategy, and the willingness to learn from failure. In study after study, across different populations and different age groups, people with growth mindsets consistently outperformed people with fixed mindsets. Not because they started with more ability, but because they were willing to try when the outcome was uncertain, willing to fail publicly, willing to extract the lesson from the failure, and willing to try again with that lesson incorporated. The fixed mindset is the dreamer's internal posture. It keeps you from fully committing because if you don't fully commit, you can't fully fail. And if you can't fully fail, your self-image remains technically intact. The growth mindset is the winner's internal posture. It tells you that your current level is just your starting point, that every failure contains information, and that the only true waste is the attempt not made. Accountability is the growth mindset applied to your whole life. It is the decision to say, "I don't have it all figured out. I have made mistakes. I have avoided things I knew I should face. I have let the comfortable option win when the right option was harder. I have been dishonest with myself about what I've actually been doing versus what I've been telling myself I'm doing. And all of that is on me, not as a source of shame, as a source of power. Because if it's on me, I can change it. Starting now, today, in this moment that is the only moment I actually have." Fear. What it actually is and what winners do with it. Let's talk about fear with the level of honesty it deserves, because fear is at the center of this entire conversation, and the way most people have been taught to think about it is almost comprehensively backwards. The conventional messaging around fear and success goes something like this. Successful people don't feel fear the way you do. They're braver, bolder, wired differently. They are constitutionally equipped to handle risk and uncertainty in ways that ordinary people simply aren't. And because you feel fear, because the prospect of putting yourself out there, of risking failure, of being seen trying and potentially falling short, of betting on yourself without a guarantee, because that prospect genuinely frightens you, it means you're not the type of person who does those things. The fear is evidence of a limit. The fear is a signal to stop and wait and prepare more. That is wrong. Wrong in every important respect, and it keeps more people trapped in comfortable prisons than almost any other single belief. Here is what fear actually is. It is information. It is your nervous system's way of telling you that you are approaching something that matters, that involves real stakes, that carries real risk, real exposure, the possibility of real loss. Fear is your biology doing its job, alerting you to conditions that require attention and intention. In the context of pursuing meaningful goals, fear almost never points at something you should avoid. It almost always points at something you must go toward, precisely because the things that are worth building are exactly the kinds of things that generate fear on the way to them. Easy things don't produce fear. Safe things don't produce fear. Things that don't matter don't produce fear. Only the things that matter, the things that would genuinely change your life if you got them, and would genuinely disappoint you if you didn't. Only those things produce that specific visceral, this might not work fear. And that is a map, not a stop sign. A map. Think about what you are afraid of, specifically in the context of your goals. You're afraid to launch the business because you're afraid of failing, of losing the money, of people finding out you tried and it didn't work. You're afraid to submit the application because you're afraid of rejection, of being told explicitly that you're not good enough for what you want. You're afraid to write the book or record the first video or share the work because you're afraid of judgment, of the audience that might be indifferent or critical. You're afraid to make the leap because you're afraid of what your life looks like if the leap doesn't land. Now look at that list and notice what every single item has in common. Every one of them is pointed at something that matters to you. You would not be afraid of failing at the business if the business didn't mean something. You would not fear rejection for the role if the role didn't represent something important about the life you want. The fear is proportional to the meaning. Where your deepest fear lives, your real priorities live right beside it, inseparable. Your fear is a better map of what you actually care about than any vision board you've ever made. Winners feel fear. I want to say that clearly and without equivocation, because the mythology of success often implies otherwise. Winners feel fear. Real, physical, this might not work, what if I fall short fear. They are not immune to it. They have not been trained or transformed into people for whom fear is not an experience. They feel it in the same way you do. The quickened heartbeat, the tightening in the chest, the voice in the head that says, maybe wait a little longer, maybe get a little more prepared, maybe the time isn't quite right. They feel all of it. The difference, the entire definitive difference, is what they do with it. The dreamer uses fear as a reason to stop, as evidence that the conditions aren't right yet, that more preparation is needed. The winner uses fear as a compass, as confirmation that the direction is right and the stakes are real and the thing they're going toward is worth the fear it's generating. The fear doesn't stop them, it focuses them. Navy SEALs, some of the most rigorously trained and capable human beings on the planet, do not pass through Hell Week by not being afraid. Hell Week is roughly 5.5 days of nearly continuous physical exertion, sleep deprivation, cold water immersion, and relentless pressure designed explicitly to be almost unbearable. It is designed to find out who can function when everything in their body and mind is demanding they stop. The people who make it through are not the people who feel no fear and no pain. They are the people who feel it all. The bone-deep cold, the disorientation of sleep deprivation, the fear that they might not make it, the genuine doubt about whether this is worth it, and they keep moving anyway. They made a decision, somewhere in those hours before dawn, that the discomfort would not be given the authority to stop them. That is the decision. That is the whole difference. One decision, held consistently under brutal circumstances. You have the capacity to make that decision in your own life. You have always had the capacity. The question is whether you will make it and whether you will maintain it when the conditions that test it arrive. The story you tell yourself. There is something that does not get discussed enough in conversations about the gap between potential and achievement, and it is the most foundational thing of all, the internal narrative you carry about yourself. The story you have been told and have come to believe about who you are, what you're capable of, what you deserve, and what is realistic for someone with your particular history. That story is not a neutral observer of your life. That story is an active, driving force. It shapes every decision you make, every risk you lean toward or away from, every opportunity you reach for or let pass. The story you tell yourself about yourself is one of the most determinative factors in what your life ultimately becomes. And here is the painful, crucial thing. Most people's stories were not written by them. They were written for them. By parents who had their own limitations and their own fears, by teachers operating within systems that sorted children into categories of potential, by peers who reinforced hierarchies of status and capability that were arbitrary but felt definitive, by early experiences of failure or humiliation that arrived before a person was developed enough to contextualize them accurately. You're not the athletic one your brother is. You're not the academic one your sister is. Don't get too big for your boots. People from this town don't do things like that. You're not really the leadership type. You dream too much. These things got written into the story. And then, with the terrible efficiency of self-fulfilling prophecy, life began to confirm the story. Because your beliefs about your capacity drive your behavior, and your behavior drives your outcomes, and your outcomes are interpreted through the lens of your beliefs, and around it goes in a self-sealing loop. You can't see the loop from inside the loop. The loop looks like reality. It looks like just how things are. Winners found a way out. Some had their story rewritten by a mentor or a pivotal experience. Some fought their way out through the accumulated experience of attempting things they'd been told they couldn't do, and discovering, empirically, that they could. Some made a conscious decision, at a specific moment they can often still remember, to stop letting an old story written by limited people at a limited time determine the rest of their plot. The mechanism is always the same. The winner decided that the story was not the truth, that it was a narrative assembled by people who didn't know better, or didn't know them, or were operating out of their own limitations and fears. And they began, clumsily, imperfectly, with setbacks, with the old story fighting back, to write a different one. One that said, I am not a fixed thing. I am a developing thing. And what I am capable of is not determined by what I have done or what I have been told. It is determined by what I choose to pursue, how long I am willing to stay in the process, and how willing I am to be wrong on the way to getting it right. The long game. Here is another place where winners and dreamers diverge sharply. The culture we live in is, at a structural level, deeply hostile to long-term thinking. We live in a world of instant information, instant entertainment, instant delivery, instant connection, instant feedback in almost every domain of life. The entire architecture of modern existence is organized around the premise that waiting is a problem to be solved, that delay is a malfunction, that anything worth having should be available immediately or something has gone wrong. And that architecture has infected the way people think about achievement. They want the result fast. They want the lean body in 8 weeks. They want the 6-figure income in the first year. They want the rapid transformation that they can document and share. And when month 3 arrives and the business is barely breaking even, when month 2 arrives and the scale has barely moved, when year 1 arrives and they're still grinding without the results they imagined by now, they conclude that something is wrong, that the thing isn't working, and they stop. Winners play the long game. Not because they don't want results now, they do. Probably more urgently than the dreamer because the stakes feel more real to them. But because they have correctly identified the actual time horizon over which meaningful transformation occurs, and they have committed to operating within that time horizon regardless of what the short-term picture looks like.
They understand that the visible results almost always lag behind the real progress. That what you see above the surface is always a lagging indicator of what has already happened below it. Consider Moso bamboo. When planted, it shows no visible growth above ground for the first 4 years. 4 years of watering, fertilizing, tending to a patch of soil that shows absolutely nothing in return. Anyone watching from the outside would conclude that the seed is dead, that the conditions are wrong, that the effort has been wasted. They would be wrong. During those 4 years, the bamboo is building a root system beneath the surface. An intricate, extraordinarily deep, and extensive root system, capable of supporting what comes next. And what comes next, in year 5, is up to 90 feet of growth in 6 weeks. Not because the bamboo suddenly started working, because the bamboo had been working the entire time where no one could see it. The years during which it looks like nothing is happening. The years of grinding at the skills, building the relationships, accumulating the knowledge, developing the reputation, strengthening the body, making the work a little better every week. Those are almost always the years during which everything is happening below the surface. And when the conditions align, what erupts from that foundation is not luck, and it is not magic. It is the inevitable mathematical consequence of the work that was done when nobody was watching, when nobody was validating, when the results were invisible and the doubt was loudest. The dreamer gives up in year 2 because they can't see the root system growing. The winner stays in year 4 because they understand that the root system is the whole game, and what comes above ground is just the evidence of what was already built below. The people around you. The social environment you inhabit is one of the most powerful and least discussed forces shaping your trajectory. The specific people you spend the most time with, the voices you are most regularly exposed to, the norms and ambient expectations of the communities you belong to. These things are not passive features of your life. They are active forces that are constantly calibrating what you believe is normal, what you believe is possible, how hard you think you should be working, and how much discomfort you think you should be willing to endure in pursuit of something you want. Dreamers tend to surround themselves with other dreamers, and dreamers validate each other with tremendous warmth and sincerity. I know, the timing has just never been right for me either. We should both do it someday. Things are just so hard right now. It makes sense that neither of us has been able to get there. There is love in that. There is genuine human connection. But the validation, however sincerely offered, is also permission. Permission to stay in the dream, to keep the timeline indefinitely open, to interpret the current gap between intention and action as temporary and understandable rather than structural and urgent. And that permission, given and received repeatedly over months and years, is keeping everyone in the loop from ever breaking out of it. Winners are almost always part of an environment, chosen deliberately, stumbled into fortunately, or in some cases forced upon them, that normalizes high performance, that treats hard work as the default rather than the exception, that holds people to standards proportional to their potential rather than comfortable relative to the group average. When everyone around you is building something, pursuing something, holding themselves to account for something, your own behavior adjusts, not through willpower, through osmosis, through the deeply human need to belong, to measure up, to not be the one in the room who is coasting when everyone else is committed. This doesn't mean abandoning everyone in your current life. It means actively, deliberately seeking contexts where the people operating at the level you want are the norm. Mentors who have already been where you're trying to go. Peer groups organized around serious ambition. Communities where the standard of effort that you're currently afraid to commit to is simply what everyone around you does every day. The environment does work that willpower alone cannot sustain. Constructing the right environment is one of the most practical, most leveraged decisions available to anyone who is serious about becoming who they want to become.
Failure. The thing winners know that dreamers don't. Here's perhaps the most counterintuitive truth in this entire conversation. Failure is not the enemy of winning. Failure is one of the essential raw materials from which winners are constructed. And the sooner you are able to internalize this, not as a phrase you repeat to yourself, but as a genuine operating belief that changes what you actually do when things go wrong, the sooner your relationship with failure shifts from something that stops you to something that builds you. Dreamers treat failure as a verdict. When something doesn't work, when the pitch fails, when the launch underperforms, when the business folds, when the attempt falls short, the dreamer receives that result as information about their fundamental worthiness, as confirmation of the old story. I tried and it didn't work, which means I'm not really the type of person who succeeds at these things, which is what I've suspected about myself, which means I shouldn't try again because trying again and failing again would be even worse. The failure feeds the old story. The old story uses the failure to make itself more permanent. And gradually, the number of things the dreamer is willing to attempt shrinks, and the life contracts around the perimeter of what feels safe. Winners treat failure as data, not comfortable data. Failure is not comfortable, and anyone who tells you to love failure or treat the experience of it as fun is not being honest with you. Real failure is painful. Some failures are genuinely devastating. Losing a business you've invested years and all of your savings into is devastating. Being passed over for something you've worked toward for a long time is painful in ways that require real time to process. These things deserve to be felt honestly. But through and after the pain, what failure is, at its most fundamental level, is information. It tells you something didn't work the way you designed it. It tells you something needs to change. It gives you more information about the problem you're trying to solve than any amount of prior theorizing could have produced. And all of that information is useful. All of it can be turned into something better. Thomas Edison's documented path to the functional incandescent light bulb involved well over 1,000 failed iterations. He reportedly described each one not as a failure, but as a confirmed data point. Another approach eliminated, another variable tested, another step closer to the solution by virtue of knowing what the solution was not. That reframe from "I failed again" to "I now know something I didn't know before" is the whole shift. It changes what the failure means, and what the failure means determines whether it stops you or builds you. James Dyson built 5,126 prototypes of his bagless vacuum cleaner before arriving at the one that worked. 15 years, 5,126 failures. The knowledge that accumulated across those attempts represented the most comprehensive practical understanding of the engineering challenges involved that any individual had ever assembled. When he finally had a product that worked, he also had 15 years of knowing exactly why every alternative approach didn't, which made his product genuinely, substantively superior in ways that competitors starting from scratch could not easily replicate. The failures were not detours, they were the education. The capacity to absorb failure repeatedly without losing the willingness to try again is the most essential capability that serious achievement in any difficult domain requires. And it is developed exclusively through experience, through failing, surviving the failure, extracting the lesson, and returning to the attempt. The failures are the curriculum. The only question is whether you are willing to stay enrolled. Discipline is the bridge. We have talked about the dream, and we have talked about the outcome. We have described where dreamers live and mapped where winners operate. Now let's name the structure that actually connects the two. The bridge you have to build and cross every single day. That bridge is discipline, not willpower. Discipline. They are not the same thing, and confusing them is one of the most common and costly mistakes in the entire territory of self-improvement. Willpower is a resource, finite, depleting through use,
most available in the morning and most diminished by evening. Research from psychology on this topic, including work associated with the concept of ego depletion, has suggested that the capacity for self-control diminishes as the day progresses, which is why people find it easiest to make disciplined choices early and increasingly difficult as fatigue accumulates. Relying on willpower as your primary mechanism for doing hard things consistently is like trying to run a marathon by sprinting the whole way. You will run out of resource before you run out of road. Discipline operates on an entirely different principle. Discipline is a system, not a resource. It is the architecture of habits, routines, commitments, and environmental cues that you have built around yourself so that the right behavior is not the result of a daily battle of willpower, but the default path of least resistance. You have removed or minimized the decision from the equation. You do not decide every morning whether to brush your teeth. You just do it, because the habit is so completely established that the friction has been taken out of it. Discipline, at its highest expression, does this to your most important behaviors. It makes them automatic. It makes the doing of them feel more natural than the not doing. And at that point, the behavior becomes identity, and the identity generates the behavior with far less conscious effort than it once required. James Clear, who wrote Atomic Habits in 2018, one of the most impactful books on behavior change in recent decades, makes this point with striking clarity. The most powerful way to change your behavior permanently is not to focus on what you want to achieve, but to focus on who you want to become. Every action you take is a vote for the identity you are either building or eroding. When you go to the gym on a day you don't feel like going, you are casting a vote for the identity of a person who shows up. When you sit down to write a paragraph when you don't feel inspired, you are casting a vote for the identity of a person who creates consistently. No single vote determines the election, but over thousands of votes, the pattern becomes the identity, and the identity becomes the behavior, and the behavior produces the life. The dreamer votes inconsistently, shows up with tremendous enthusiasm, then disappears for a stretch. Shows up again, disappears again. The votes cancel each other out and no clear identity emerges. The winner votes consistently. Not perfectly. No one votes perfectly. And perfectionism in this domain is itself an obstacle. But consistently enough that the identity begins to solidify. And the solidifying identity makes it progressively easier to cast the right vote, and the cycle becomes self-reinforcing in the best possible way. This is how the person who hated running becomes a runner. This is how the person who thought they weren't a writer becomes someone who writes every day. This is how the winner is made, not in a moment of inspiration, but in the gradual, cumulative, compounding accumulation of right votes cast in ordinary moments. The winners nobody clapped for. I want to take a moment here to honor a population of winners that almost never gets discussed in these conversations, because these conversations tend to gravitate toward the famous, the wealthy, the publicly celebrated. And those examples are useful. But they can create a false impression that winning is what happens to exceptional people who end up on stages or in magazine profiles. Winning is something else entirely. There are people who went through things that should have destroyed them. Statistically, psychologically, practically should have ended their ability to function, to contribute, to build, and didn't let it. Not because they were touched by divine favor, not because they were genetically different from the rest of us, but because they decided, in the worst moment of their life, to not let the worst moment of their life write the rest of the story. Consider the veteran who came home with injuries that ended the only career they'd ever wanted, the only identity they'd ever fully inhabited, and who rebuilt, slowly, painfully, with tremendous effort and inevitable setbacks, a new one. Not in spite of what they went through, but shaped by it. Made more intentional because of it. made more aware of what actually matters because they have been to a place where nothing was guaranteed. Consider the woman who left an abusive relationship with nothing. No money, no plan, no support network, no blueprint, and who slowly, carefully, day by day, built a life that her children could be proud of and that she could finally recognize as her own. Consider what that required of her in the moments that were not on any stage, in front of any audience. Just her, alone with the weight of what she'd survived, deciding every day what the next chapter would be. These are winners. They didn't end up on lists. They didn't give talks. They didn't accumulate followers. But they did something that the vast majority of people who have faced far less will never do. They looked at the worst version of their circumstances and refused to let it be the last word. They won. Quietly. Without applause. And that kind of winning is the most pure expression of what winning actually is. The decision that changes everything. Everything we have covered in this conversation. The daily discipline, the radical accountability, the long game, the relationship with failure, the environment, the story, the refusal to wait for the right moment. All of it traces back to one foundational act that precedes and enables all of it. A decision. A real one. Not a hope. Not an intention. Not a, I'm going to try this. A decision so complete in its commitment that it reorganizes how you operate. A decision that has already factored in the hard days and the failures and the doubt and the setbacks, and has already determined that none of those things will be sufficient cause to reverse it. A decision that has burned the comfortable retreat options behind it, not out of recklessness, but because keeping retreat options fully open is itself a form of not fully deciding. And not fully deciding produces not fully doing, and not fully doing produces nothing. Most people have never made a decision at that level. They have made pseudo-decisions, decisions with escape clauses, conditions, and revision rights built into the fine print. I'll give this 6 months and see. I'm committed to this unless something changes significantly. Those are not decisions. Those are experiments. And experiments produce experimental results. A real decision, the kind winners make, has a different quality. It closes certain doors by the act of opening another. It reallocates attention, energy, and time in ways that do not require constant re-justification, because the justification has been settled. It makes the path unambiguous, even when the path is hard. And the unambiguity is part of what makes it possible to stay on it when the going becomes difficult, because there is no longer a serious internal debate about whether you are going to continue. There is only the question of how. You can make that decision today, right now. Not when the situation is better or the conditions are more favorable or you feel more prepared or more deserving. Today, with full awareness that it will be hard, that you will fail sometimes, that there will be mornings when the discipline feels like a wall and the progress feels invisible and the doubt is loudest. You can decide today that you are done being a person who wants the life and doesn't build it. That you are done being a person with rich intentions and empty days. That you are done waiting for the right moment because the right moment is this one, and you will keep making it this one every time it needs to be made. And when you fall down, because you will fall down, you get back up. Not because you feel like getting back up. Not because it's easy or natural or because everything inside you wants to. You get back up because you made a decision, and a real decision does not get unmade by a bad day, by a failure, by a setback, by the feeling that you might not make it. A real decision survives all of that. It has to. That's what makes it real. The regret that waits. There is something I want to leave you with. Not a framework, not a numbered summary. Something you need to carry, especially on the days when the discipline is hard and the results seem far away and the gap between where you are and where you want to be feels impossibly wide.
Bronnie Ware was a palliative care nurse in Australia who spent years working with people in the final weeks of their lives. People for whom the arc of the story was complete, who could see the whole of it from the vantage point of its end. She recorded their reflections on what they wished had been different, and eventually published those reflections in a book called The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. And the number one regret, the most commonly expressed, the most deeply felt by people looking back at the entirety of their lives with nothing left to protect or pretend, was this: I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me. Not, I wish I hadn't worked so hard. Not, I wish I hadn't taken those risks. Not, I wish I hadn't tried those things that didn't work out. The regret that dominated was the dream unlived, the potential that sat inside them and was never fully released into the world, the chances never taken, the lives never truly begun, the versions of themselves they could feel they had the capacity to become, but never gave themselves full permission to pursue. That regret is waiting at the end of the comfortable road. At the end of the road paved with intentions and good reasons for not starting, not pushing, not risking, not committing. The road that feels like wisdom while you're on it, responsible, reasonable, sensible, and feels like loss when you reach the end of it and realize what you never picked up. The comparison trap and how it destroys momentum. There is one more force working against dreamers that we need to talk about before we go any further, and it is one that the modern world has supercharged to a level that previous generations never had to contend with at anywhere near the same intensity. The comparison trap. The habit of measuring your beginning against someone else's middle, your chapter 1 against someone else's chapter 15, your unfinished draft against the polished final product that someone else has been refining for a decade and chose to present on a curated platform designed to show only the best version of everything. We live in an era where the distance between you and the most visible, impressive version of another person's life and career is exactly 3 seconds of scrolling. You wake up in the morning and before you've had coffee, before you've had a real thought, before you've had a moment to simply exist in your own life without measuring it against anything external, you have consumed a highlight reel of other people's results. The entrepreneur who just announced a funding round, the athlete who just posted their workout and their body looks like something that should be impossible, the person who left their 9-to-5 2 years ago and is now traveling the world and writing about freedom and making it look effortless, the writer who just published their book, the investor who just posted their portfolio performance, the person who seems to have figured out everything you're still struggling with, and who looks like they figured it out without particular effort, without particular hardship, without the specific confusion and doubt and grinding mediocrity that you are currently experiencing in your own pursuit. And then you look at your life, your early morning, your ordinary circumstances, your progress that feels slow and uncertain, and maybe embarrassing compared to what these other people appear to be doing. And the comparison generates something corrosive. It generates either despair, I'm so far behind, maybe I'm not the kind of person who gets there, or it generates a false urgency that pushes you toward shortcuts, toward the appearance of progress rather than the substance of it, toward the kind of frantic, unfocused activity that looks like working but isn't really building anything. Winners are not immune to comparison. They live in the same world with the same phone and the same social media feeds. But they have developed through deliberate effort or through the hard lessons of experience, a different relationship with what they observe in other people's lives. They have learned to use comparison as fuel rather than as judgment. When a winner looks at someone who is further along in a domain they care about, the internal response is not, "I'll never be that." It is, "That tells me it's possible. That person is proof of concept. Now let me focus on my own work." The gap between where they are and where they see someone else operating is not evidence of a permanent limit. It is a destination. And destinations are useful. Destinations give you direction. As long as you don't confuse looking at the destination with actually moving toward it. The dreamer's relationship with comparison is fundamentally different. The dreamer looks at someone further along and feels one of two things. Either they feel defeated, and the defeat feeds the old story and reduces the likelihood of trying, or they feel inspired, which generates a burst of energy that doesn't survive contact with the reality of sustained effort. Inspiration without a structure to channel it is like a match struck in a storm. It flares briefly, brightly, and then it's gone. The dreamer knows this cycle intimately. They have felt it hundreds of times. The video that got them fired up. The book that made them feel like this time was going to be different. The conversation that reignited the ambition. And then a week later, nothing has changed. Because inspiration alone cannot carry you through the days when the work is mundane, when the progress is invisible, when the doubt is loudest and the motivation is nowhere to be found. Winners don't depend on inspiration. They have built systems that operate whether inspiration shows up or not. The inspiration is a bonus, not a requirement. The discipline runs in its absence, steady and reliable, producing output day after day regardless of whether the internal experience of doing the work feels exciting. And over time, the consistent output produces the results that generate the kind of real, earned confidence that no amount of inspiration could ever manufacture, because it is built on actual evidence of what you can do, rather than on the temporary emotional high of believing you might. There is something important here about the nature of real confidence versus the kind of surface-level, inspiration-adjacent confidence that motivational content often sells. Real confidence is not a feeling you summon before doing hard things. Real confidence is a conclusion you arrive at through evidence, through the repeated experience of attempting something difficult, sometimes failing, continuing anyway, and gradually building a track record that tells you something true about your capacity. It is built backward from action, not forward from belief. You do not become confident and then start trying. You start trying, fail, try again, accumulate a track record. And the track record builds the confidence that makes the next attempt feel more possible than the last one did. This is why the winner's confidence often looks so different from the outside than the dreamer's version of confidence. The dreamer's confidence is often loudest before anything has been tried. It is the confidence of the unsupported belief, the confidence of someone who has not yet been tested by contact with reality. It can be convincing. It can even be inspiring. But it is fragile. Contact with real difficulty shatters it quickly. The winner's confidence is often quieter, more understated, because it is not a belief about what might be possible. It is a conclusion drawn from what has actually been done. It does not need to perform itself loudly because it does not require external validation. It simply is. Built on the only foundation that supports the weight of the life you're trying to build. The record of what you have shown up for, what you have worked through, what you have survived and continued despite. Urgency. The thing that separates now from eventually. There is a quality that winners possess that is among the least discussed and arguably the most decisive: genuine urgency. Not the manufactured urgency of a countdown timer on a sales page, not the temporary urgency created by a crisis or a deadline imposed from outside, but the deep, internally generated, personally meaningful urgency that comes from a person who has truly reckoned with the fact that their time here is not infinite, that the window for becoming who they want to become and building what they want to build is not going to remain open indefinitely, and that every day they spend in comfort and inaction is a day they are never getting back. Most people have had the experience of getting a genuinely frightening health diagnosis, or watching someone they love receive one, and feeling the entire world reorganize around what actually matters. All of the small anxieties and petty distractions and comfortable postponements of important things suddenly feel enormously stupid in the face of a reminder that time is not an infinite resource. People in those moments report feeling more alive, more intentional,
more clear about what they actually value and what they are done tolerating. They make decisions they've been putting off. They have conversations they've been avoiding. They begin things they've been meaning to begin. And the version of themselves that emerges from that confrontation with mortality is often the most real, most purposeful, most directed version of themselves they have ever inhabited. And then, often, the crisis passes. The diagnosis turns out to be less severe than feared. The health improves. The fear recedes. And so does the urgency. And so does the clarity. And so does the behavior. And the person returns to the comfortable, deferred, I'll get to it eventually version of themselves. And the window that looked so precious and finite from inside the crisis looks manageable and flexible again from outside it. And eventually is a long way away. And there's no particular reason today has to be the day. Winners have found a way to access that clarity without requiring the crisis to trigger it. They have made the finitude of their time a permanent operating assumption rather than an occasional crisis-generated shock. They live with the awareness, sometimes conscious, sometimes simply baked into the way they approach each day, that they are not going to get another version of their life. That the time they are currently inside of is the time they have, and that how they spend it, not in the aggregate, not in the big dramatic choices, but in the quiet, ordinary, uncelebrated daily choices, is the whole of what their life is made of. This is what the Japanese concept of ikigai points at, in part. It is what Marcus Aurelius wrote about in Meditations, his personal journal, never intended for publication, where he reminded himself repeatedly that each morning is a gift, that the day is not guaranteed, that action must not be deferred. You have power over your mind, not outside events, he wrote. Realize this, and you will find strength. These were not abstract philosophical observations for him. They were operational reminders to a man in one of the most demanding leadership roles in the ancient world, reminding himself to not waste the day, to not spend the hours on trivialities and avoidances when there was important work to be done. The winner looks at the same 24 hours that the dreamer has and experiences them differently. Not because the winner has more hours. No one has more hours. Not because the winner needs less sleep, or never gets tired, or is constitutionally immune to distraction. But because the winner has made the hours mean something specific. Has assigned them a purpose that transcends the day-to-day drift. Has connected the way each hour is spent to a larger arc of meaning that makes the wasting of those hours feel genuinely costly rather than vaguely unfortunate. You have this. You have access to exactly this. You do not need to wait for a crisis. You need only to sit quietly and honestly with the question that most people work very hard to avoid. If I live the way I have been living for the next 10 years, where will I be? If I keep choosing comfort over growth, intention over action, the right moment over beginning, where does that road go? What is the honest, clear-eyed projection of that trajectory? And is that a life I am willing to accept? Is that a version of myself I am willing to become? If the answer is no, and for most people, if they sit with it honestly, the answer is no, then the next question is simple. Not easy. Simple. What am I going to do differently today? Not eventually. Not in the next chapter. Today, in the hours I have in front of me right now. That question, taken seriously, lived in consistently, answered honestly every single morning. That question is the engine of a winner's life. It is what turns the dream into the building, the intention into the act, the someday into the now. It is not glamorous. It does not produce a highlight reel that would look impressive on social media. But it produces something more valuable than any of that. It produces a life that is actually being lived, actually being built, actually moving in the direction of what you believe your potential is capable of. And at the end of that life, not the end of the Instagram feed, the end of the actual life, that is what you will want to be able to say. Not that you looked good while talking about it, that you did it, that you tried, that you showed up when it was hard and kept going when it was discouraging and built something real in the time you were given. That is the legacy of a winner. Not the trophy or the title or the net worth figure. The life actually lived at the level of the person's actual potential, rather than safely inside the comfortable perimeter of their fears and their excuses and their deferred intentions. What you owe the version of you that never got to try. Here is the final frame I want to give you, and it is one that has stayed with me as one of the most powerful ways to think about what's at stake in this conversation. Somewhere inside you, there is a version of yourself that your current choices are either building or burying. A version of you that is capable of the things you dream about, that has the discipline you admire in others, that has done the work and earned the life and knows, not believes, but knows because the track record is there, that they are someone who shows up, who doesn't quit, who builds things that matter. That version of you is not a fantasy. It is not an idealized fiction. It is the natural result of the daily decisions made by a person who has chosen, truly chosen, not just in theory but in practice, to take their potential seriously. And there is another version, the one that took the comfortable road, the one that kept the intentions warm and the dreams vivid and the planning detailed, and never quite made the bridge to the doing. The one that will arrive at the end of their life with the book not written, the business not built, the conversation not had, the potential not fully released. And that version will have excellent reasons, understandable reasons, reasons that sound compassionate when you say them to yourself. But that will not change what that version of you does and does not become. That will not give back the time that was spent in comfort and deferral. That will not make the unlived life feel lived. You owe it to the version of you that could be, the version that is possible, to not bury it under the comfortable weight of everything you have been telling yourself about why now is not the right time. You owe it to that version to begin, to show up, to do the hard thing when the hard thing is available to you, to treat your potential not as something to be held in reserve, to be deployed someday when conditions are perfect, but as the most pressing responsibility of your daily existence. The dreamer holds the potential in reserve. The winner deploys it, every day, in the small decisions and the large ones, in the moment when the alarm goes off and the choice is there, in the moment when the fear is loudest and the retreat option is available, in the moment when nothing seems to be working and quitting feels like the only sane option. That is where the winner is made. Not in the highlight reel, in the moment of choice, chosen right, day after day, in the life that nobody is filming. Go make yours. The identity shift that makes everything easier. There is one practical, concrete thing I want to give you before we close this conversation, because everything we've talked about can feel enormous and abstract and a little overwhelming if you don't have a way to translate it into something you can do today. And the most powerful thing you can do today, more powerful than making a grand plan, more powerful than setting a goal, more powerful than reorganizing your schedule, is this. Decide who you are going to be, not what you are going to do, who you are going to be. The dreamer operates from a goal. I want to lose 30 pounds. I want to build a business that makes 6 figures. I want to write a book. And those goals are fine. Goals give you direction. But goals alone are not enough. And here is why. Goals are external to you. They describe a future outcome you want to arrive at. And when the path toward that outcome gets difficult, which it always will, there is no internal structure preventing you from simply abandoning the goal. The goal does not define you. Failing to reach it is uncomfortable, but it does not fundamentally threaten your sense of who you are. And so the escape option is always available, and people take it, and they reframe it as being realistic, and life goes on. The winner operates from an identity. Not, I want to get healthy, but I am someone who takes care of their body. Not, I want to build a business, but
I am an entrepreneur. Not, I want to write a book, but I am a writer. The difference sounds superficial. It is not. When your desired behavior is attached to your identity rather than to a goal, the stakes of the decision change. When you say, I am a runner, skipping the run is not just failing to hit a metric, it is acting inconsistently with who you are. And that inconsistency is psychologically costly in a way that merely missing a goal is not. The identity creates accountability that external goals cannot. But the identity cannot be assigned from the outside. It cannot be adopted by declaration alone. It must be earned through repeated action, through the casting of the votes we talked about earlier, through showing up consistently enough that the description stops being aspirational and starts being descriptive. You do not decide to be a runner and then become one. You run and run and run until running is simply what you do, and then you are a runner. The identity follows the behavior. But the behavior is aimed at the identity, and keeping that target in mind, not the outcome, but the kind of person the outcome requires you to become, is what keeps you moving through the days when the outcome feels impossibly distant. This is the shift. This is the practical thing. Ask yourself not, what do I want to achieve, but who do I need to become? And then start casting votes for that person. Today, with the next decision available to you. Not the big, dramatic decision, the small one. The one nobody will notice except you. The one that doesn't seem to matter in isolation, but, repeated across thousands of days, is the only thing that was ever going to get you there. That is the last lesson. Not a secret, not a shortcut. The oldest truth there is about what it takes to build a life worth having. Decide who you're going to be, and then show up as that person in every ordinary moment available to you. The moments add up. They always do. The only question is what they add up to. If this conversation hit something in you, if something in here landed with the weight of truth, if you felt something shift or sharpen, or become clear in a way it wasn't before, do me a favor and hit that like button. It is the simplest thing you can do, and it means a tremendous amount to this channel, because it tells the platform that this kind of content is worth putting in front of more people who might need to hear it just as much as you did. And if you are new here, if you have not subscribed yet, let me tell you directly what this channel is and what it is not. It is not a place for comfortable motivation that makes you feel good for 20 minutes and fades by the next morning. It is built for the people who are serious, the people who are ready to do the real, uncomfortable, unglamorous, worth it work of building a real life. We put out content consistently, and every video is made with the same intention as this one. To give you something true, something challenging, something you can carry with you and actually use. Subscribe. Stay with us. The most important conversations are still ahead. Now go build something.